From the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, presented by A Cloud Guru, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, one of the things that we tend to notice a lot is a lot of times we'll get wrapped up in the idea of, you know, the things that are happening in the public cloud are all about business agility. It's about going fast, go fast and break things. And sometimes we forget because we're in the cloud and we have this perception that, well, the cloud's going to be cheaper, it's on demand, that, you know, we don't have to pay attention to what costs look like. And we've always come back to this idea that, you know, we've got to pay attention around cost. We've got to be smart about how we deal with that. And I think as we're seeing more and more people using the public cloud, we're having to kind of refigure out the behaviors that we need. We need to have certain awarenesses. We need to have certain behaviors about how we use the cloud, provision the cloud, use it on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, sometimes some things will catch our eye, catch Aaron and I's eye, and we go, okay, that's an interesting either set of data points or survey or kind of concept, and we want to dig into it a little more. And so today, very excited to have Andy Richman, who is product manager for Park My Cloud. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. So before we kind of, I want to kind of get into your background a little bit, but there was an interesting survey that was run recently, and it talked about cloud waste and you know how we're efficiently using or not efficiently using cloud. And so I kind of want to dig into that today. But before we dig into that, why don't you give us a little bit of your background in terms of around technology with Park My Cloud, maybe before you're with Park My Cloud, and give folks a sense of kind of, you know, where you've been in the industry and kind of level of experience around this type of problem.
Sure. So my background's been more in building, growing data analytics focused businesses. And as you know, most of those data analytics businesses migrated to the cloud pretty early on. So I was involved in building a company that had a great business intelligence platform, and we were one of the first users, actually in the UK, before I moved to the US, of the Microsoft Cloud products. So got a pretty early exposure to what's going on in cloud there. And for the last few years, I've been working with the team at Park My Cloud to build out a simple, single-purpose SaaS product that really addresses this issue of cloud waste.
Gotcha. And
I'm pretty obsessed with the whole market. I mean, when friends ask me what I do, I say I'm in the waste management business. Makes them giggle a bit, but I mean, that's the way we think about it. Cloud waste management is a segment all of its own, and it's definitely very interesting. Yeah.
You know, it was interesting that the survey and the data that was collected around this was sort of structured around waste, because I think people have a perception until you've really been using the public cloud for a while that, well, you know, the pricing on the websites always talk about things in pennies per hour, and I can get things on demand. I can turn it off when I want. That the public cloud, you know, must be cheaper. And then sometimes people will get a bill and they weren't really sure about it, or a really big bill and they were kind of surprised by it. Are you finding as you talk to companies that are using the public cloud that there's still a lot of kind of resetting of expectations of what cost, just basic cost to run day-to-day operations look like? You know, are people surprised when they get the first bill or just ongoing bills? Where are you seeing people's heads in terms of understanding of what it costs to run in the cloud?
It really depends where they are in terms of their movement to cloud. And if they're born in the cloud company, then they're typically quite sophisticated and understand pretty quickly as those bills begin to come in month after month, and they typically don't go down. But this is a big piece of operating in the cloud. If you're a company that's migrating, let's say, from a private data center to the cloud, often your expectations and your experience are quite different. And so that can often take a bit longer to really figure out. But I think you're absolutely right with what you're saying. I mean, I'd often ask people, how many hours are there in a month? And people look at you like, what kind of question is that? I mean, just tell me, how many hours do you think there are in a month?
Right.
People have this idea. So when they're seeing things at 15 cents an hour, 25 cents an hour, whatever it is, they're not doing that mental math to turn that into a monthly cost. And then once you start to roll that up across, you know, tens or hundreds or even thousands of individual instances and other services you're buying, I mean, those numbers, rack up pretty fast.
Right. Right. And IT people have been classically trained to, their focus from a cost perspective has always been on the procurement process, right? Let's bring in some vendors. Let's kind of judge them against each other. We'll figure out how much we can save by using some new technology. And then after the purchase has been made, they sort of forget about it. And now we're forcing them to have to be day to day, aware of what's going on. It's a little bit like if you start a diet and you get one of those calculators that tells you how much each calorie is, and you realize like, oh wow, I didn't know that one was that much. I didn't realize that apple was this much or a Snickers was that much. So it's definitely a change of behavior that we're seeing. The other thing that I've noticed a lot, and I've been trying to follow the kind of the cloud cost space, is I find that it's kind of the tooling around it, the frameworks around it kind of fall into two categories. There's the people or the tools that focus on the upfront procurement. Do we use spot markets? Do we use reserved instances? Should we buy on demand? And that feels like a little more of a financial engineering process, if you will. And then there's the sort of day-to-day, more DevOps type of thing, which is, we're responsible for running this. We still have budgets we have to keep, but we want to make sure we keep the lights on. Do you find that we're starting to see kind of a more distinct split between the people who think about the upfront purchase versus the day-to-day, more DevOps, getting into IT thing?
Absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is we do encounter both, but we typically get engaged with the bottom-up route, which is through those DevOps folks who have typically been tasked with going out there, doing some research, understanding what's possible, and putting together a strategy for the organization. That doesn't mean that they haven't already been told that the enterprise is going to be making a commitment to reserved instances or a strategy around using Spot, that kind of thing. So that can sometimes, almost box off some opportunities that they may discover. And one of the things we find quite often is that when people begin to understand what they can do on a day-to-day basis, it would have actually changed some of those strategic decisions. So as an example, within non-production environments, there's often opportunities to turn off instances for multiple hours over a week. And just looking within our own platform, I mean, we see people saving up to 65% a week on those on-demand instances being used in non-production, which is really significant. And if you do a side-by-side comparison to turning things off in non-production versus actually committing to a 1 or 3 year reserved instance contract, there's some interesting economics around that, which would have probably changed the decision that was made early on.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because people were used to buying servers for 3 years, 3-year depreciation, so they kind of, their natural inclination might be to go buy a 3-year contract because it feels like what you've done before. The other kind of follow-up to that is I know, like in the security world, as people move towards DevOps, they sort of begin to have these more blended teams. We're seeing a lot of discussion around sort of DevSecOps, where people are saying, look, security is a critical element. You need to embed security into your team. Do you think there's sort of a need for something that's analogous to like a DevFinOps, where you've got to have some sort of financial management awareness built into the team all the time? Is that something that you're seeing evolve as well?
I mean, great point, Brian. I mean, we see everyone from the coders developing product right the way through to the way in which the code's being committed, the systems are being built and deployed to production, all the way up and down that stack. We're seeing people engage with this particular issue. Because oftentimes, let's go back to that code piece. I mean, people are spinning up instances. They don't have to pick up the phone and call an IT ops person to get a bit of infrastructure in place. They can do it themselves.
Right.
And the more they begin to understand the opportunities for saving, which ultimately generally means that they actually have more money to spend on other projects that they would like to be doing, the more, I don't know what the term is, the more active they get in using tools like ours.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Now, let's go back to the concept of waste a little bit. Waste in IT, 6-7 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, became a big thing because virtualization came along in people's data centers, and people were very actively sort of going, oh, okay, I'm underutilizing an asset. I can use virtualization to consolidate some things. And there was a lot of talk at the time that said, well, if you could just turn off instances, at night when you're not using them, on the weekends you're not using them, you would save a lot. Especially you'd save electricity, right? Sort of power and cooling and electricity. And while logically that made a lot of sense, there was people who were kind of afraid of that because they said, well, I'm not afraid of turning them off. I'm afraid of turning them back on because turning them back on requires not just flipping a switch, but being intelligent about it. Which instances have dependencies on other ones? Will this work if DHCP is not working or DNS isn't available at the time, or you can't log into Active Directory? How do you help people get over that concern, whether it's psychologically or technologically, about turning things off in the cloud, and then the cross your fingers that when you turn them back on, they're all going to come back and work the same way?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different pieces that are going on here. First of all, increasingly we're seeing people wanting integration. So whether that's integrations with, Jenkins or other DevOps tools that they're kind of thinking about as they're standing their infrastructure up, how is that going to be automated with the rest of their CI/CD processes? So that's one piece of it. The other one is this, we'll call it orchestration of bringing things up and taking things down. And so we've developed within our own product a construct that we call a logical group. And this is the ability to link together different VMs instances and then set start times and stop times between them so that you can bring up, for instance, a database first and then a web server or maybe an integration server behind that, and then do that in such an orderly manner that you avoid the kind of issues that you're describing, and the same then on the shutdown.
Okay.
And one of the things with this is that initially when we launched the product, this wasn't something that people were thinking about, but as the evolution of this cost waste management piece has evolved, people's thinking evolves, and they begin to see more sophisticated ways to do this.
Right. Yeah. And we used to see them in the past because they would be, the concept was kind of tied to run books, but the run books would typically be specifically to like disaster recovery because, that's when people immediately would think, okay, something goes off and comes back on. The other thing I noticed as I was digging into the Park My Cloud platform was you have this concept called smart parking, and that's tied to this idea of giving people intelligence around, what can you do to be efficient around waste or around usage? Can you dig in a little bit of what that technology does and how people typically apply it?
Yeah, sure. So if I give you a bit of history to how we've thought about this problem, then it will kind of illustrate where we are now. So when we first launched, what we were using was both tags and keywords to identify VMs that were candidates for turning off. So if something's called, I don't know, Dev Server 1, there's probably a reasonable chance it's being used for development, not for production, and so we can flag it. There could be something in a tag. And so we were doing that straight out the gate. But in speaking to our customers, what we found was they would still have to pick up the phone and call Jim or Jane or whoever it was and kind of check what that particular instance was and can it go off and when's it being used and will someone need it over the weekend, that kind of thing. And so we really wanted to build out from that. And so what we've done is to begin to bring in the utilization data that we can sit alongside that. And so looking for patterns within usage that would suggest things, for instance, can be off on the weekends or in the evenings. And we allow people to generate pretty simple heat maps and then to look at those heat maps over time. So what you can do is you can come in and look at, say, like the last 8 weeks of usage patterns. And I describe it almost by looking at weather. You see these kind of dark clouds coming over and then things getting light again as usage goes up and down. And so what we've been able to do based on that is to make these smart parking recommendations. And we've kind of lifted a construct out of the financial services world, which is how aggressive do you want to be about these recommendations? If you want to be super aggressive, maximize savings, then there's probably going to be a little bit more risk that someone's going to come in and need to get access to something and need to start it up manually, which is something we allow. but it could be off when they need it. Or you can be more conservative and say, actually, you know what, we're going to really, savings will be nice, but we want to absolutely minimize any potential, downtime or delays in terms of our business. And so we allow people to kind of flick those switches or move those sliders and see what happens in terms of the recommendations.
Right. No, I think it's smart, and the ability to also visualize it, color code it, and so forth is helpful. I can't tell you how many people I've heard stories of who will say, well, I got my bill the other day and I completely forgot that I had put this instance over in a different region. So maybe I work almost exclusively in US East, and then I forgot that I put one over in US West. And they'll forget about it because, like, on the AWS console, there's not a simple way to kind of visualize all of my regions at the same time. They kind of do it by region. So it's smart to put it together in a way that becomes more visual. You sort of hide some of the things that may have gotten lost in some of the other tools or sort of the native tools. So, hey, let me ask. Yeah. Yes. Go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, in fact, one of the things people most like about our, we call it the operational dashboard, is the fact they can see all their resources. That could be order scaling groups, it could be individual instances, it could be databases. They see it all in one view, irrespective of region, with the cost right next to them. And you're absolutely right. People often forget that they span something up in, I don't know, Oregon or Ireland or wherever, and suddenly they'll see that they've had an instance running for the last 2 months, or a database that's just been left out there.
Right. And potentially left insecure or something like that. So, the last thing I want to kind of bring up with you, we're seeing this trend. Obviously, part of looking at waste, looking at cost management. There's a part of it that's an ops issue, part of it's a financial issue, and then we're starting to see this trend in AWS that's. And people don't love the term, but sometimes it gets termed as sort of no ops. I'll sort of call it like less ops. We see things like serverless, which is, hey, I don't really want to have to think about operations as much. Or, we're starting to see it with like their Aurora database has sort of a serverless like thing where they manage, IO and so forth. Do you think is that a trend that you hear people kind of saying, I would like things more like the beginnings of these other services? Are people wanting less and less to think about ops? Are they just wanting better tooling? Where do you get a sense of that? Because it does impact, not every one of those tools fits every application, so you need flexibility. But are you seeing that as a trend where people are like, I just want to think less about this stuff, I want to focus more on the business? Or is there still very much a distinct ops element that just maybe doesn't get as many highlights or headlines and stuff?
So it's always interesting to look at the ebbs and flows of what issues come up and when they come up. And the two things that are clearly out there are both containers and serverless. Honestly, we probably hear more about the containerization piece, albeit a lot of that has, from our perspective, seemed to focus more on the production side of the shop rather than the dev, test, QA, data analytics side. And it's interesting from my read of, I try and keep on top of this stuff, is that they seem to be growing at a similar level, but it's still not mainstream. And most of the workloads we see are still sitting out there, on infrastructure the way it was 2-3 years ago. It's just a lot more of it now. Right.
But
it's something we're thinking about, and the ability, as an example, to really optimize containers and the spend on that, and the way in which these containers scale horizontally. We think there's probably some optimization there.
Yeah, no, and we're always fascinated by the SaaS platforms that, at the end of the day they're providing services to IT ops, which are interesting and sometimes new and novel, sometimes just a better way of doing it. But they have the unique advantage that like IT vendors in the past never did, where you're sort of constantly connected with your customer. You've got insight into what they're doing. You can collect data across lots of different customers, and you're learning about overall environments as much as anybody, and you're learning very quickly. And so it's very powerful to see that then become, automated recommendations, suggestions of what people can do, probably eventually things that people can set to just automatically make their world better. So it's we're always fascinated as how fast the SaaS platforms are involving the intelligence that you can bring to IT organizations.
I mean, we definitely see the automation thing. I mean, this is our bet, is that more and more of this is going to be automated. I mean, in terms of today, where I think beyond what we're currently doing, there's a lot of opportunity is in the auto-scaling group. I mean, most people who are going to the cloud, one of the first benefits you really realize is this ability to auto-scale. And when you begin to look at some of it, we offer some optimization of that. You can change settings in terms of your min-max desired, and if you want, effectively turn it off or park it. But we think within the day-to-day running of those auto-scaling groups, there's probably quite a lot of automation there and a lot of financial benefits to be had. And so that's definitely something that's on our roadmap and probably is more pressing in the short to medium term for most organizations and some of the containerization and serverless optimization.
Yeah. Let me wrap up and ask you one last question, because I know we've talked a lot about sort of the technology of making sure we're not spending too much or we're being efficient. What do you recommend to people kind of behavior-wise or maybe organization-wise about, how to be smarter about better, day two spend, DevOps-centric spend? Are you finding there are certain habits that the successful companies have adopted that you recommend to others?
So let me tell you how I tend to look at it and the mental math I do. So pick up your bill at the end of the month and let's go after the biggest items. And for most people, that is the compute piece. Typically about 70% of the bill is your instances, servers, VMs, whatever you want to call them. Dig within that, and within our infrastructure, we see typically between 40 to 50% of that being in this non-production world. So that could be dev, test, QA, could be other analytics workloads, whatever it is. And there's some big savings to be had there. And so within our platform, the average saving, if you do turn something off, is about $130 a month, which is really pretty significant given the size of many people's infrastructure. Mm-hmm. You then start going down, okay, so we're going to really optimize that piece of our compute. What else? Well, you've got the databases. And again, we've really focused on that. And as an example, RDS, which is a big piece of many people's infrastructure within AWS, you can turn that off. Significant savings there. You then start to go down, to the smaller things. You may have orphaned volumes out there. You may have old snapshots. You may have lots of old AMIs hanging around. As you mentioned, you may have volumes in different different regions around the world, which you weren't aware of. But typically, they're the smaller ticket items. The big stuff is this: really manage your compute well. Think about how you're using auto-scaling, and really look at your entire DevOps integrations and look at those points where you could potentially integrate in with a system like this. I mean, we have a open RESTful API. We have webhooks. We integrate with Slack. I mean, there's many different ways in which you can coordinate and optimize alongside the rest of what you're doing within your infrastructure.
Gotcha. So it's dig into the numbers, provide visibility to the team, like you said, through Slack and other things. And those are great pieces of advice. And again, sort of simple things that everybody can do. So I appreciate it. Listen, Andy, I'm going to wrap it up with that. What's the best way for people to either reach out to you to kind of dig into some of these ideas a little more, or engage with the broader Park My Cloud team and maybe start using the platform, trialing the platform, and so forth?
Sure. So it's parkmycloud.com. Pretty easy to find. We actually have a 14-day free trial, and then there's a freemium tier. So by all means, come in, start using it. We love feedback. And then you can reach us through the website. There's a chatter on there. We're always available. Someone's available during working hours, Eastern time, to talk to you as well. So by all means, reach out. Excellent.
Well, listen, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Andy, thank you for the discussion. It's been very, very good. And folks, like we said, we're always trying to get a better understanding of, the spend people have in the cloud, how they can be more efficient with it. And I'll put a link in the show notes to the survey that Park My Cloud had put together around waste and hopefully save you some money. So, folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. For Aaron and for Andy, thank you for listening as always, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more podcasts, show notes, and everything social media. And visit acloud.guru for all your cloud training needs.